And today we are going to be talking, within the theme of the new year and new beginnings and having a new outlook. We're going to look at how to look at the current state of where you are and how we can really examine how to set goals and improve your day-to-day life and just in general live well when you have a diagnosis of MCI. All right, so we know that when you get a diagnosis, it affects you in a lot of different ways. And having this condition affects you emotionally, of course. When you get a diagnosis, people really run the gamut of different emotions that they go through. And it also affects you in practical ways. For example, if you're not able to uh, drive in the same way that you used to, you're not driving maybe in the evening or at rush hour. That affects you in practical ways because how are you going to get from point A to point B? And it affects the way that you live your day-to-day life. For example, if you're not driving, in on 285 in rush hour, but you have a club that requires you to do that, that affects how you live your life. And the extent to which you can continue to pursue things that you enjoy. So we're going to really look today again at ways to help you cope with those kind of issues. We're going to talk to you about how you can identify the challenges that you have. You have lots and lots of abilities. Your abilities are far more than your challenges, but it's important for us to be realistic about what those challenges are. And then that in that way, we can set goals to help work on those challenges. And ultimately, of course, at the end of the day, our end goal is to live with as much joy and purpose and meaning as we possibly can. That's a good goal for everybody. All right. So when you get a diagnosis of cognitive impairment, I kind of give the analogy of a fork in the road. It's like, experiencing this new road. When you're on this road to the left here in this picture, that's the road you were on. And you kind of have an idea of where you were going to at the end of that road and maybe what it was going to look like along the way. And then you get this diagnosis, and suddenly you're on this new road, and you don't know what's at the end of that road, and you don't know what's along that path. But our goal really is to make this new road the best that it can possibly be, even if we're not sure exactly what that end destination looks like, which honestly, none of us really do ultimately. We want to make that trip, that road, the very best that it can be. And again, live with joy and meaning in your life. Uh, as Megan mentioned, I've been working with people with cognitive impairment for a long time, since 1993. And generally, the experience of people when they get a diagnosis, again, is a myriad of emotions, and it's a very difficult thing to diagnosis to receive, particularly if the underlying cause of your symptoms is something progressive like Alzheimer's disease. And one of the things I think that makes it really difficult is that the progression is so uncertain. We don't know how fast progression will be, what the symptoms will even be, what they will look like. There's a lot of uncertainty with this diagnosis. So that's one of the things that makes it difficult. But it also associated with cognitive loss is this other whole related series of losses. So you're losing some of your abilities, maybe to remember as well as you once did. You may not be able to do things as complicated things as quickly or as thoroughly as you used to. You also kind of, again, like we were talking about in the road analogy, you lose what you had planned sometimes for your future. What you thought your future was going to look like might not necessarily be the same. So you might have to change those plans, and that can feel like a loss for lots of folks. And as the symptoms kind of affect your day-to-day life. Sometimes you're struggling with the loss of your independence. If you're needing some help doing some things, or like we were saying before, if you've altered your driving habits and maybe you need a ride, that represents a loss of independence. And so those losses are, in life, we all have losses, and human beings have a grief reaction to loss in general. And so sometimes when we have a diagnosis, we have this grief reaction, these feelings that are associated with grieving and losses. So, and I'm sure you've heard of the stages of grief. You've got the denial at first, and then, the bargaining. Oh, maybe this isn't, really MCI. Maybe this is just me being super stressed. And then there's anger. We get angry because it's only natural to feel, those feelings of why me? Why is this happening to me? Really angry about this. And then a lot of people go through a period where they're really sad. And then at the end of that journey, we strive for acceptance of the diagnosis, but acceptance is not usually the end goal in a place where you kind of stay. This whole journey is a process, and the grief reaction, these stages are often very fluid and nonlinear. So you can bounce back and forth between these different stages. That is, again, a completely normal human reaction. But I think it's important for us to recognize that that process is common to most people that get this diagnosis, so that we can normalize having these different feelings and recognize, again, what's happening, and perhaps set goals to kind of maybe move through the stages that are not so comfortable. So we'll talk about that more in just a bit. So let's talk about the coping with the symptoms of MCI. I think if there's one common reaction on kind of a day-to-day basis that people experience, it's frustration. It's really frustrated to notice yourself having problems with your short-term memory or having difficulty with tasks that have always been easy. But some people who have this diagnosis don't notice the changes in their abilities as much as others. And this is sometimes for some people because the changes that are happening in the brain make it difficult to notice those changes. And so other people might actually be more aware of the issues that you're having than you are. And that can be really stressful when you, with the diagnosis, and your loved one who knows you very well, are kind of on different pages and are seeing different things and are feeling different ways about the challenges that you're having. And this, not everybody goes through this. There are some folks who are very aware of what their challenges are, and they notice the changes in their abilities. And they recognize that these changes are happening. And then, of course, other people don't. And it's common enough that there is a name for it, and it's called anosognosia or anosognosia, when the changes in the brain interfere with people's ability to recognize what's going on. So when that's happening, it can be, again, really difficult for people who have these different ideas of what they see. One thing that we really need to be careful about, though, is to not assume too much. Let's just say I'm a care partner and I see my loved one having some difficulty in an area. And so I think that they're maybe just as impaired in other areas. And I've made a little chart here to sort of illustrate this concept for you. On the left, there are some different abilities, some different, what we called IADLs, instrumental activities of daily living, which are just more complicated things that we do, most of us do every day or almost every day. And so that's, doing finances and driving and cooking, managing your medication, and just, doing housework. So there are X's on these lines, and the further to the left the X is, that means the more impaired the person is in that area. And the further on to the right the X is, it means that those abilities are more intact. And so for this person, this fictional person here, the X by doing finances is further to the left. So that means that this person is having lots and lots of trouble doing the finances. And just as an aside, this is one of the first things that many people notice when they're early on in this process. And I think that's probably because doing the finances is a very abstract task, and it's complicated and it has multiple steps. And so again, many people find that that's one of the first things that they notice that they're having difficulty with. So that people will, pay bills twice, forget to pay bills, make errors in judgment, and those kind of things. So again, this person's having a lot of trouble with this. It's tempting to assume that this person is similarly impaired in all of these areas, but that is not necessarily the case. It might be, but it's not always. And so we need to be careful of not assuming. So this person, their driving ability actually objectively is still really pretty good. They can cook great, they're managing their medication really well, and they're doing the housekeeping pretty well too. So I wanted to show this because I think this concept is particularly important for goal setting, because to set appropriate goals that are achievable and meaningful, you have to really take a look realistically at what the challenges are. If you're starting from a place of not being realistic about, what the challenge is, then your goal setting is going to be affected by that. So again, people can have different perceptions of abilities. And this is a great slide that my coworker Debbie made of the mountain. And there are two sides to this mountain. And one person on this one side of the mountain, again, can have a very different viewpoint than the person on the other side of the mountain. And it's difficult to see each other's perspective and viewpoint. So I think that communication with each other is really key. And as we talk to each other about what your perception of the situation is and what your perception of it is, we have to, number one, assume good intentions. We assume that people who care about you and are telling you what they're observing, this is well-intentioned and they just want to be helpful. And so again, that requires us as observers to be really objective, not assume too much, and just really say what we see rather than what we're assuming the challenges are. And acknowledge that this is a common obstacle for a lot of people. It's okay to, and we normalize that. And again, you can be proactive about this. Ask for, what other people are observing, what their viewpoint is. And you can say, I'd really like for you to be honest with me, but I'd also like for you to deliver the information in a very kind and gentle and diplomatic way. And I'd like for you to really be understanding and patient as we share this information. So I think doing a little bit of this proactive talking about talking and talking about how we communicate about these things sets us up for success when we go to set our goals. Okay, so as we look at our challenges, I think it's helpful to look at some of the common issues that people have when they're coping with a diagnosis of mild cognitive issues. And this is a model that was put together by a social worker named Robin Yale, who is one of the first experts in early cognitive impairment. She wrote the first book for support groups for people with MCI and early dementia back in the 90s. So she's really a pioneer in this field. And she identified this model of coping. And her theory is, and I think it's a really great model and a great place to start when you're looking at the issues, is that she says that you cope with a diagnosis and cope with its effects in different ways. You cope with it emotionally, you cope with the effects that it has on your lifestyle, and you cope with the things that it uh, does to your practical day-to-day life as well, the practical strategies that you might be using. And so we're going to take a quicker look at each one of these. And I want you, as we go through, to think about whether or not some of these really resonate with you, and whether they're challenges that you have and things that you might potentially want to work on. Before we do that, I just want to call your attention to, that this is a Venn diagram, and that's because there is so much overlap in these issues. And I think I'll use the driving again as an example. Oops, that auto advanced. This is a perfect example of the overlap effect of these, the domains of coping. And it's listed here under, it's really under the category of safety issues under lifestyle. So indeed, your driving ability and your driving habits play a big part in how you live your day-to-day life. So that's a lifestyle issue. But when you start to think about, altering your driving habits or giving up the keys, that's also very emotional. People get, understandably as upset about that as about anything else that happens in this journey. But it also is a practical strategy issue, because you have to figure out, the nuts and bolts of, okay, how am I going to get from point A to point B? What does that look like? I got to think about the practical aspects. And so as with driving, there are a lot of areas in which there's much overlap. Some of these issues are not only emotional, but affect your lifestyle and require you to come up with practical coping strategies. So let's take a look quickly at the different domains here. So think about these things. And again, as we go through these, think about whether these things might be a challenge for you, and whether these are things that you might want to potentially set goals around. So number one, do you think you've fully accepted your diagnosis of MCI? And if not, maybe you could do some more research, talk to professionals, just do a little bit more of a deep dive into, why you think you might be stuck in maybe some denial around your diagnosis. Has it made you think about life more? Oops, this is on auto advance. Sorry, y'all. Okay. Has it made you think about, the meaning of life and about mortality? A lot of people, when they get a diagnosis, they never really had serious thoughts about these things, but maybe it has for you. How has it affected your sense of who you are? Many folks with MCI have really prided themselves on their memory and on their cognitive abilities. And when those are affected, it really does something to your sense of self and your identity. So that's something to think about. Have you been able to express your feelings to others about your diagnosis? Or have you talked to other people about your diagnosis at all? We'll talk more about that in a minute. And do you feel you're a resilient person? In our program, we look at the research that says that there are ways, habits that you can adopt to increase your resilience. And so that might be a challenge for some people, and potentially a goal that you can actually take steps to work on. So those are some of the emotional issues that go along with that domain that you might be experiencing, or someone you love. The next domain is lifestyle issues. So within lifestyle issues are, how does the diagnosis affect your relationships, and have they changed? Have they affected your social activities? For example, if you're not able to get to your club as easily, or if you go to a book club and you're not able to remember the plot of the books as well. So has it affected those things? What are your challenges there? And what might your goals be around that? Have you done your planning for the future? Uh, all of us need to do that, and most of us have some work to do. So we'll talk about that also specifically in a minute. Are you comfortable asking others for help when you need it? That might be a goal that you could work on, feeling more comfortable and at ease asking folks for help when needed. And then, have you experienced any safety issues like with driving, or have you left something on the stove? And what might be some goals that you could put around that? Like if you have had some issues with driving, or if people have told you that they've noticed some changes in your driving, maybe your goal might be to do a driving assessment. And then finally, we'll look at the practical coping strategies here. So how do you deal with stress? Your stress management is super, super important. Um, Too much stress, excess stress is, we know from research, is very bad for your brain. There's hormones and chemicals like cortisol that get released when you have lots and lots of stress that we know affect the hippocampus, which deals with memory and all parts of the brain. So being intentional about dealing with your stress is really important for everybody, but especially for people who need to have their brains as well functioning as possible. So, are you using memory aids like calendars? At our program, we use something called the Memory Support System, which involves a little calendar system that's not just used for appointments, but for remembering other things. And if that kind of thing is a challenge for you, maybe a goal could be to put something like that into place. Then do you have a good support system? That's really important. And we'll talk, that's so important that that's one of the specific challenges that we'll talk about in a minute. And do you practice good physical wellness habits? That's important for all of us. And do you do any cognitive exercises or things which stimulate you cognitively and strengthen your cognitive abilities? So think about whether you have challenges with these and whether you might want to set goals around some of these. And then let's see. All right. So again, looking at the model again, consider what your strengths are. And, we're talking about challenges, but we also want to emphasize that you need to really use the strengths that you have, which are many, to help compensate for the challenges that you have. And so the goal is not just to cope, which the definition of coping is to deal effectively with something difficult, but the goal really is to thrive, to continue to be vigorous and successful, to accomplish your goals, your purpose, to maintain your purpose in life, and to advance, to um, uh, um, quality of life, which you feel good about and happy with. That's thriving. So when we set goals, there's an acronym that kind of helps you determine whether you're setting a goal that's most useful for you and that gives you a better chance of reaching the goal. And it's a smarter goal. And the acronym is, the goal should be specific, meaningful, achievable, relevant, time bound. You need to be able to evaluate them and readjust them. So really quickly, be specific about your goal. Don't make it so nebulous that it's hard to, figure out how to achieve it. Like, I'm going to get a driving assessment next month, and here are the steps that I'm going to take to get that driving assessment done. They need to be meaningful for you. You need to set goals that are important to you and meaningful. Otherwise, you won't be as motivated to work towards it. It needs to be achievable. Don't set a goal that you feel like is kind of pie in the sky or something that you really won't be able to accomplish. And needs to, of course, be relevant to what you're trying to achieve. And then it's good to set sort of time limits on it. Or, like I said, next month, by the end of next month, I'm going to try to get this assessment done so that it doesn't kind of the can doesn't get kicked down the road. Then an important part of goal setting is to evaluate your progress and then readjust the goal as needed. Because sometimes a goal needs a little bit of tweaking after we set it. So when we're setting these goals, I want you to think about some common challenges that if you haven't already sort of addressed these things, that these might be good ones for you to focus on. First of all, it's, have you shared your diagnosis and are you struggling with who to tell? Some people, and I'm very respectful of people's decisions around this, but there's a very helpful kind of graphic here. It's a bullseye. And, you think about, first of all, who do I really need to tell? And that would be the red center of the bullseye, the people that I really need to tell. And those are the people that, in one way or another, are absolutely directly affected by your diagnosis. And then maybe in the next circle are the people that I feel closest to. That might be the next circle of folks that I might want to consider discussing the diagnosis with. And then as you think about who to tell, think about who will continue to support you, through this journey. And people can't help you. They can't support you and be kind of with you on the journey unless they kind of know what's going on. And so all of these things are factors. And when you're, trying to figure out, should I tell, who do I tell, and when do I tell? And many of this content in these slides today is taken from the Alzheimer's Association. Just because it's the Alzheimer's Association doesn't mean that they don't also deal with MCI, mild cognitive impairment. And they have lots and lots of great suggestions for making decisions like this and how to do it, and kind of looking at the different points, the pros and cons of doing this. But I think it's important as we tell people that we need to not always expect them to give you the reaction that you wanted or expected right away. Sometimes people need to digest it a little bit, so that you can move forward together. And so just, give people grace when you're delivering the news, and then you can come together. And again, hopefully they'll be on your support team. The next thing, if you haven't already done it, this is, I think, a really important goal for all of us, for all adults, to plan for the future, for your wishes, so that your wishes will be carried out for down the road. The worst thing in the world is for your family to have to make difficult decisions without knowing what your wishes are. So it's really important to have those conversations with them. Oops. Sorry, this keeps advancing. So, the very worst thing is to be trying to make decisions when you're in the middle of a crisis. And so when you have all of this stuff done, the crisis is avoided. The documentation's all there. People won't be trying to figure out what you would have wanted, and it gives you peace of mind, and it gives others peace of mind. It's a great gift that you give to people when you get your affairs in order, do your wills, your advance directive for healthcare, your powers of attorney, and let people know what your wishes are. It's a great goal if you haven't already done it. And again, just the things that I just mentioned were in the category of advanced directives, will, advanced directive for healthcare. But in addition to those kind of legal financial documents, planning for the future also involves other safety issues, like if you're having trouble with your meal preparation, for example, and you're leaving the stove on and you're having some concerns, and maybe you live by yourself. Down the road, it's good to do some planning around, some goal setting around what does that look like? Or if you can't manage your medication, or, again, what's your plan for driving if you're, going to have to change your driving habits. If you have firearms in the house, that's, if you look at general list of safety issues to consider when you get any kind of a cognitive diagnosis is what's the plan for firearms? Because that can, that's a safety consideration. And then finally, do you have a plan B for an alternate living situation if that is needed in the future? And again, these things are not just for people with MCI, they're for older adults in general. But I think it's very important to have these conversations with your family or, your very closest friends, people that are on your support team about, what your wishes are and write it down so everyone will be on the same page. We've referred a little bit to building a support system, but I think when you first get a diagnosis, it's an opportunity to really start to develop a support system that will follow you and help you through the whole journey. And so it doesn't have to be just your close family and friends. On your support team are your healthcare professionals, services in the community that might help you do things, your place of worship. There are also things like support groups and support blogs and message boards that you can connect with other people. Your attorneys and financial advisors, those kind of folks, I think, are in the circle of people that probably need to know about your diagnosis, but they can also be on your support team, but they can't unless you're upfront with them about what's happening. Volunteers are on your support team, and then there's a lot of technology supports that can really help you, like voice assistants. So I want you to think out of the box about who can be on your team and continue to provide you not just with practical support but with emotional support. And then finally, we want to make sure that we, incorporate joy, purpose, and meaning into our lives. We all have a certain number of days allotted. We don't know how many days we'll have, but what we do with those days should make us think about what's truly important, what gives us joy, what are the things that we value, do we want to leave a legacy, and how do we go about that? So I think this is also great fodder for goal setting, thinking about what gives you joy, purpose, and meaning, and how do I intentionally incorporate more of that into my life? What are the steps that I'm going to take to do that?